All right, so we are finally here doing some proofs now. This is going to take a little bit to get used to, but just bear with you and just work through it. So the very first piece of information is you're always going to start with your givens. So my first given says that PQ, that segment, is congruent to segment RS. And I'm getting that obviously from the given here. And you want to make sure that's marked on your picture as well, that those two are congruent. And the reasoning for that is that it's given. Your first reasoning will always be given because that's what we start with. Now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to actually look for our, any more information we have. And typically I'm just going to write down all my givens right away. So angle PQS is congruent to angle RSQ. And if we look here, that's going to be this angle PQS and angle RSQ. All right, so there we go. We have those two things marked. Now the next thing is, remember we need three things concurrent. Oh, sorry. What's my reasoning for that one? That one is also going to be given. It's okay to use your reasoning more than once if it happens. Now the first thing we want to do, since we're out of givens, is we want to see, is there anything else we can do with these things? So if... knowing that PQ is congruent to RS, those segments are congruent, is there anything we can do with that further? No, we're stuck. Knowing that those two angles are congruent, is there anything we can do further with that? No, we're stuck. So therefore, those two aren't going to help us do anything else, which means we need to start looking for our invisible pieces of information, which once again typically are going to be a reflexive or vertical angles. And I do see I have a reflexive line here, so my next statement is going to be QS is congruent to QS. And the reasoning for that is reflexive. Okay. Reflexive property, you can write that reflexive property of congruence. You can write that down if you want, but I'm just fine with reflexive as well. And then since we know now three things, I have a side, I have an angle, and I have a side, and they're in that order, I can say triangle PQS is congruent to triangle RSQ. So notice your last statement here should be what you're trying to prove, because that's what we want our end goal to be. Your fourth reason here will never be proof, and I know that was a common thing I saw in the test, so be careful with that. You don't want to write proof down there. You want to tell me how you know that. And anytime you say a triangle is congruent to a triangle, you're always going to have one of five options here. So it's going to be your SSS or your AAS or whatever the reasoning is for that. So in this case, for this specific problem, it's going to be side, angle, side. And then I like to put the steps that tell me that I have a side congruent, an angle congruent, and a side congruent. So in this case, it'll be steps 1, then 2, then 3. And it's totally okay for that to be out of order. All right, and you completed your first proof. So let's move on to number 2 here. So once again, we have this given, angle L is congruent to angle N. Okay, that's an angle that we have congruent. We have this angle L is congruent to angle N. And our reason for that is just given. So remember, that's always going to be your first reasoning. Now the second piece of information that we have is also given to us. So I can write that down, and it's going to be that angle MOL is congruent to angle OMN. And that's going to be this angle is congruent to that angle. And once we have that information, that's awesome. We're out of givens. So now we want to see, so that is an angle that's congruent. We want to see if we have more information that those given statements give us, which they don't. So then we're looking for invisible pieces of information. And once again, we're going to have this same reflexive line congruent. And it's going to be that MO segment is congruent to segment MO because that's reflexive, which gives us a side. And now we do have three parts of the triangles that are congruent. So I can finally use that prove statement. Triangle MOL is congruent to triangle OMN. And our reason for that is going to be angle, angle, side. Remember to match up the angles on the sides correctly. So we've got step 1, step 2, and step 3 again in order, which once again doesn't have to be the case, but in this problem it is. All right, let's move on with a couple more. Question 3. So first statement is going to be that segment LM is congruent to segment NO. So we've got LM congruent to NO. We know this because it is given to us. Our next statement, we also have another given. So angle M is congruent to angle O. That is also given to us. Okay, so this one's an angle. That first one we had was a side, it was a pair of segments. And we can't do anything else with that S and that A, but we can do step 3, which is going to be that piece of invisible information. So like I said, it might be reflexive, but it also could be vertical angles. So angle MPL is going to be congruent to angle OPN, and that's going to be my VAT, my vertical angles theorem, that said that those two things are going to be congruent. And then because we have that, we now know, sorry, this is a pair of angles. We now know that triangle LMP, once again, I'm just looking at my proof statement here. Triangle LMP is going to be congruent to triangle NOP. And this is because of angle, side. So first we have the vertical angles, and then we have angle M and angle O, and then we have the side. So this is actually going to be order 3, 2, 1. And once again, notice the side that we have congruent that touches the angle has to be the same way in here. So that S has to be touching that middle angle there. All right, and step number 4. All right, so we have LM is congruent to segment PO. So we have these two segments congruent here. That is given. That's a pair of segments. My next thing is I know that LN segment is congruent to segment PN. And that's also going to be given to us. It's a segment. So then my third one, we actually have another given here. We have N is midpoint of segment MO. And this also is given to us. Okay, but the problem here is that you can look at and see we have 2 steps left. But note that that third given doesn't actually give us a segment, a side or an angle that is congruent. So therefore that one didn't help us yet, but there's going to be more information that helps us with that. Well, we know N is the midpoint of MO, so what does that mean? Oh, that must mean MN segment, right? This one, that half, is congruent to segment NO. This other half here. And how do we know that? Well, this goes back to what we did in chapter 2 here with midpoint, right? And our proofs, our geometric proofs. If N is the midpoint of MO, and we know that, then this reasoning that they're congruent is going to be definition of midpoint. Once again, anytime you see a definition or word, vocabulary word in your proof, there's a really good chance we're going to use the definition of that word as a reasoning in our proof. And the definition of midpoint is definitely one of those things that are on the front of your packet too, that say that that can be a possible reason for a proof. So now we do know that these segments are congruent, and therefore we can prove that the triangle is congruent. So first of all, actually, when I use definition of midpoint, I have to know that we have a midpoint. So for me, I'm going to put step 3 there, and that tells me that, oh, I said there was a midpoint in step 3, so now I can use definition of midpoint. So number 5, once again, is going to be our proof statement. So triangle LMN is congruent to triangle PON. And what's our reasoning for this one? Well, it's pretty easy to look on our margin here. We see SSS, so it's going to be side, side, side. And actually the order doesn't necessarily matter with this because we're just naming sides of a triangle, and we've got 1, 2, 4. Notice if you did a good proof, you should see all the numbers of your proof, except for obviously the last one over here. So I see step 1, step 2, step 3, and step 4. So that means I used all my steps correctly, and I wrote a correct proof. All right, so I'm going to challenge you guys to give this page a shot. See if you can figure out these proofs, figure out what they're going to look like, and then go ahead and check the answer sheet, see how you did on these proofs on this page right here. See if you can kind of fill it. If these are still pretty hard and pretty confusing, we're actually going to come back and we're going to talk about them a little bit in the next video as well. But give them a shot on your own first, and then check your answer key on Schoology, see how you did.